everyone, and welcome to The Hash, where we bring you the latest and greatest in crypto and culture. My name is Naomi Brockwell, and today on the show we have Jen Sanasi, George Kaludis, and Sandali Hundagama. I'm so sorry. I think this is my first show with you, so I'm reading your name for the first time. But welcome, everyone, and we're going to dive into it by talking about Canada. And Jen, I'm going to start off by saying I blame you. Whatever Canada has done now, I blame you for being a resident Canadian. No, it's just the way it's going to work. So let's dive into what they're doing.
You get blamed for everything that happens in Australia from now on.
Oh, God.
We're going that way.
All right. We'll call it truce. We don't want to go that route. So Canada's Trudeau enacts Emergencies Act, and crypto is implicated in it. So it's this kind of ridiculous situation where the government, they're used to having control over the money supply, and suddenly they freeze all of these accounts and fundraisers for the truckers who have this blockade across Canada, who are currently protesting mandates. The government enjoys having control over such crowdfunding sites. And then suddenly crypto is like, hey, we're this thing that you can't control. We're going to fundraise. You have sites like Tallycoin raising about $1 million for trucker causes. And then the government comes out and says, oh, if you use crypto stuff and crowdfunding things, actually that's related to terrorism, and we're going to start curtailing that and banning stuff. So he is coming down hard on everything that the government doesn't have control over. He's enacted the Emergencies Act. This is the first time it's been used since the law was passed in 1988. And they're saying that this is about keeping Canadians safe, protecting people's jobs, restoring faith in our institutions. It seems more like it's about restoring control over the money supply, and they don't like these alternative fundraisers being out there. Jen, I'm throwing it straight to you for your thoughts on all of this.
Because it's all my fault.
Because it's all your fault. No, I take it back. I'm not blaming. We won't blame me for Australia. We won't blame you for Canada.
Yeah, so I mean, okay, I just want to say the protests I don't really support. I don't know that I can completely align with some of the values that are happening with the protests. But that said, the fact that the government is using this very polarizing time in Canada to enact the Emergency Act to go after people's funds is very, very scary. You know, the Emergency Act, like you said, Naomi, hasn't been enacted since it came into conception in 1988. And now they're going after bank accounts. And so we talk a lot about, you know, governments who don't have people's best interests. And we talk about that as governments that are very far away from North America, you know, but it's happening right here in Canada, you know, a place where we didn't think that the government would go in and do this. And I know I'm sounding very flustered. I didn't think that I would get so flustered talking about this. And I think it's because I live here. George, I'm going to pass it up to you. But I think this is a really convenient way that the government has used to their benefit so that they can attack crypto. And so, George, I'm passing it back up to you because I'm really stumbling over my words here.
Yeah, this is the realest weapon of them all being brought to the front, right? Once you start messing with people's wallets, here come the real reactions. You know, money talks, bullcrap walks. Whether you do or do not support the cause of this protest, whether you do or do not believe there are opportunists that will co-opt the chaos to be violent, whether you do or do not believe that the protesters are being unreasonable, whether you do or do not believe there's foreign interference in these protests, there is a precedent here that feels really dangerous and shines a light on my least favorite reason that I like Bitcoin, in that Bitcoin does really well in times of chaos, right? And praying for the downfall of nations is good for Bitcoin. And I actually agree with you, Jen. This hits me close to home now, right? Canada is our neighbor. This doesn't feel like Venezuela. This doesn't feel like El Salvador or Zimbabwe, all these other countries that have, you know, issues with their monies and stuff like that. You know, what if there is a protest for a cause I support that the government doesn't, which I can firmly say does exist in the US where I live and in Greece where my family comes from. So there's something to be said about peaceful and lawful protests, but there's a potentially slippery slope here that is good for Bitcoin and the like, but bad for everything else. Everyone raised their hand, so I don't know who to go to first. Who
go to
wants to jump
Sandali
in there?
first.
Sandali, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you, guys. But yeah, going off of what Jen and George, what you said, the closest example I could think of was, we've seen this before in Nigeria, where the government shut down bank accounts associated with activist groups during the anti-police brutality protests in 2020. Activists had to turn to other means of raising funds, like Bitcoin, for example, and Bitcoin was hailed as a way of overcoming government censorship at a critical time. But like you said, here the emergency measures will give the Canadian government the power to pretty much do the same thing the Nigerian government tried to do. And you have like a so-called developed Western nation resorting to tactics of a government that has been accused of corruption on multiple occasions. So it's definitely interesting. And, just putting aside what the subject of the protest is, it's still quite alarming to think that something like this is happening, in my humble opinion. Back to you, Jen.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there are acts that allow the governments to go in and freeze accounts that they say are associated with acts that they don't deem appropriate. But I want to shine light on the fact that this can also happen to centralized exchanges, right? The government has influence over exchanges that are regulated, that are centralized. And so if you're just getting into crypto and you've had a hard time wrapping your head around why maybe you should store your crypto in a hard wallet and not have it on a centralized exchange, I think this is a really good example. But Naomi, I'll pass it back up to you.
Yeah, I think just diving into some of the things that they've said specifically that they're enacting, and also to back up a little bit, go back to what you're saying, Jen, about the cause itself. I mean, again, it doesn't really matter if we agree with the cause. Yeah. Overwhelmingly, the government is imposing mandates on an industry. That industry has overwhelmingly come forward and said, we do not support this. The government doesn't listen. So they say, okay, well, we'll make you listen. And then they make the government listen, and instead of doing anything to make changes against what these people are upset about, the government's like, okay, we're going to consider you terrorists if you use these fundraising methods. We're going to enact all of the same KYC and anti-money laundering and all of that for this crypto things. So the Deputy PM, Chrystia Freeland, basically said that if you are part of these protests, if you dare to protest the government in this way, then your trucks could be seized, your corporate accounts will be frozen, your vehicle insurance will be suspended. It's incredible to watch what is meant to be this democratic government come down so heavy-handed and saying, in this situation, we're going to enact all of these totalitarian measures to silence you rather than letting you have a seat at the table and have your concerns listened to, because clearly they're not willing to back down on the issues, that they've proposed. But as I said, an entire industry has come forward and said, don't apply this to us. We don't want this. And so it's just very interesting that they're responding in this way. I don't think this is the last we're going to hear from governments responding in such a heavy-handed way. When you see civilian protests, when you see civil disobedience, when you see all of that, they really don't like losing control. And honestly, crypto is all about them losing control. So we'll have to see how this battle heats up as we go forward. But let's move on to the next topic. Who's got the next one? I think it's Sandali.
I think I have the next one. So lawmakers in Russia just can't seem to agree on the best way to regulate crypto. Bloomberg reported today that the Bank of Russia chief met with the country's finance minister and deputy prime minister, but didn't get any closer to a deal. So a little bit of context on this. In January, the Central Bank of Russia called for a full ban on crypto. We're talking mining, trading, and any kind of use. But the country's finance ministry quickly opposed the ban, saying crypto needed to be regulated instead. Then President Putin chimed in, calling for the leaders to reach some kind of consensus because Russia may have some competitive advantages when it comes to mining and tech. Regulators were supposed to have reached this consensus and come up with a draft bill by February 18th, according to Bloomberg, but it looks like there hasn't been much progress. I'm going to put it up to you guys to see what you think with everything that's going on with Russia right now, George.
Yeah, I'll take it. It's a really interesting one for Russia. Yeah, you have to kind of think about it a little bit. It's weird that Russia is even considering the legality of crypto because it firmly falls out of the purview of, censorable and controllable money. But I think there's something to be said with the view of Russia and how this might hurt U.S. hegemony. Bad word. economic dominance. Sorry, my words aren't working today. Without getting too into the weeds, right? Too into the weeds about the petrodollar and its importance in the oil market really goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. An oil market settled in Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency would certainly shake the current power structures that the US is the head of, right? And Russia has a lot to gain from that. China has a lot to gain from that. So while it's weird that Russia isn't immediately banning crypto, since, it would make their capital controls on their citizens more difficult, it isn't as surprising once you dig into it a little bit more, given what the government there really wants to achieve when it comes to, unseating the U.S. So I think it makes sense that they're not saying heck no. But Naomi, anything to add there?
Well, I think there's a double-edged sword there, because we've looked at governments in the past who have realized how powerful Bitcoin can be as an uncensorable money, because it enables them to skirt sanctions and things like that. And then when it comes to, their own people using this, they're far less inclined to indulge people. So, Iran is a great example of that, where they're like, yeah, Bitcoin. Oh, wait, no, you guys can't use it. That's just for us to skirt US regulations. And I think that I think Russia's a little bit the same. They want capital controls over their people, but the central bank clearly realizes the danger of having people use crypto. Meanwhile, you've got the regulators who are looking at this saying, listen, prohibition doesn't work. There's no way we can actually enforce this. It's better to regulate it, bring it out into the open economy rather than have it stay in grey markets where we can't really keep an eye on it. So this is a way that they can actually increase control by regulating it rather than outright banning it. But meanwhile, the central bank's looking at this and saying, we kind of need to ban this because otherwise we're going to lose the power of our printing press. So it's an interesting battle that is happening here. I like the way that they looked at crypto and they're saying crypto resembles a pyramid scheme and poses a threat to people's financial well-being and the financial system and the economy. But I love the way these governments always phrase it in terms of, we're protecting you. This is in your best interest. And it's like, how about you just let people make their own choices? Maybe that's in their best interest to have control over their own financial decisions. But obviously governments don't want to think that way. But I'll throw it to you, Jeb, for your thoughts.
Yeah, Naomi, you said the exact same thing I was going to say. Every time we hear a central bank speak out about cryptocurrency, they point to those risks for the consumer, right? But they don't really outline any risks outside of what we've heard, anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism. People don't know what they're getting into. And it's becoming very, very clear that the risks that the central banks are concerned about are the risks to the central bank. And I thought it was really funny, that Ponzi scheme comment. Also, Naomi and George, I saw your face. As soon as Naomi said Ponzi scheme, you were like, which is just, It's it's the same narrative we hear over and over again, and nothing is expanded on. There's nothing new to add here. And it just feels like the central banks are beating a dead horse at this point.
Yeah, but narrative is also powerful. So when you hear these governments keep saying, Ponzi scheme, they're not exactly explaining how it's a Ponzi scheme. Ponzi scheme has a very specific definition, financial definition, and they're just kind of evading that crypto doesn't actually fit into the definition of a Ponzi scheme. But you do see mainstream population kind of parrot that. So it's a powerful tool to just say these dumb things. True. You say it enough time, people start to listen and people start to repeat it, which is the scary thing. I wish that people would be a bit more discerning and not write off crypto so readily. But it's Russia. They're the worst. So let's, just jump on that bandwagon. Let's go to a break while we take a moment to think about the narrative of crypto. And when we come back, we're going to be looking at, speaking of narratives, we're going to be looking at Blockfi, the $100 million that the government is stealing from them, and what Blockfi now plans to do in response to this. So stick around. We have a lot to dig into.
Hi, I'm Kevin Worth, CEO of CoinDesk, and you're watching CoinDesk TV.
Everyone, you are watching The Hash, where we bring you the latest and greatest in crypto. And culture. Now, this story is the latest. I don't know if it's the greatest, but here we go. Blockfi will be registering its highly controversial lending product with the SEC as part of a $100 million settlement. So they'll be confidentially filing a draft registration statement with the commission for Blockfi Yield, a new crypto offering. Naomi, I know you have a lot to say about this, so I'm going to kick it off to you for first thoughts, and then we'll get right back into the story.
Right. So I'm going to defer to Eric Voorhees. He always has such a perfect take on these situations. So he put out a couple of tweets. First one says, it's disgraceful that regulators are stealing $100 million from BlockFi. They did nothing wrong. They harmed nobody. They built a great company that provides a service customers love. Yes. And yet the SEC is considering it its purview to come in and shut that down, not because they tried to scam anyone, but because they were successful and people liked their product and it was outside of SEC's control. So the next tweet says the absurdity of penalizing an innovative company that offers 8% yield on the dollar while inflation ravages people's savings. Welcome to the USSA. I mean, he just hit the nail on the head there. We have these crypto options which finally give people a chance to safeguard the value of their money while the government is just devaluing it at an astronomical rate, where we have 7.5% inflation by official numbers right now. And suddenly we have access to these crypto tools that actually enable people to safeguard their wealth. Not everyone has access to all the same investment tools that these accredited investors do, but crypto, there are no barriers to entry. So these amazing products out there. And then the government comes in and is like, let's not let people have access to those things. So, I mean, the government's literally taking away people's ability to safeguard their wealth and take advantage of programs like this. The other thing that I want to mention is in Gary Gensler, his statement about this, where he says, today's settlement makes it clear that crypto markets must comply with time-tested securities laws. It's like, that's not what it says, Gary. What this is making clear is that the time-tested thuggish maneuvers of government work yet again, where they can just steal money from a company that is successful in providing a valuable product, and there's no recourse for that company, and you're going to force their hand, even though consumers don't want this, but you're dictating the terms of all of this. So this just infuriates me. I'm so disappointed that BlockFi is being targeted in this way. I'm disappointed that Coinbase had their earn program shut down. I'm disappointed that Celsius is being targeted by the SEC. This should not be the case, that we have valuable products out there that the government is targeting because they're successful, not because they're scamming anyone. There's been no complaints of fraud, but the SEC is coming down nonetheless. I think it's disgusting. But Sandali, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, thank you. I just saw that the SEC Commissioner, Hester Pierce, actually issued a statement on this yesterday. And it was interesting because she actually questioned if the penalty that BlockFi has to pay is proportionate. And just something that she said, lurking behind the legal analysis, she said, is an important question. Is the approach we're taking to crypto lending the best way to protect crypto lending customers? I do not think so, so I respectfully dissent. And she called the 100 million penalty that BlockFi has to pay disproportionate because BlockFi didn't fail to pay its customers the money that was due or return the crypto lent to it. So I thought that was an interesting take coming straight from the SEC. And I also feel like this whole registration thing is kind of a peace offering in a way, or the SEC's way of saying, okay, sorry about the fine, but let's kind of work together and go forward. I don't know what you guys think. But Jen, you were shaking your head. I'm going to give it to you.
Yeah, why does no one listen to Hester Pierce? She seems to be the only person in the SEC that actually speaks sense. And so I just cannot understand. I want to share a story. I was at a conference speaking to someone who represented a company which I cannot say, and it wasn't around a specific lending product, but they were talking about working with regulators. And they were saying that, we get these licenses. The license says you can do X. But then when you go to do X, you have to apply to do X, even though you've already been permitted to do X. So you make the application to do X, and then no one responds to you. And then you get your lawyer to make the application to do X, which you've already been permitted to do. And then your lawyer gets the response. And then the response to the lawyer says, while you have the license or permit to do X, we are giving you permission to do X, but please do not take this permission as us saying that it is legal to do X. You will be doing so on your own regard.
Oh my God.
And so at any
it's like
moment,
a Kafka nightmare.
Doing this activity could backfire and become illegal. And so even if you get the permissions and you get the licenses, in this particular example that I was told, you actually have no protection. You could end up in a situation where you have to pay a fine, or you find yourselves getting the heavy hand of the regulators. And Naomi, I wanted to come back to Gary Gensler's comment. It just makes me so worked up when we refer to this age-old securities law. And I'm not going to go on a tangent about orange farms right now, but this just shows us that it doesn't work. A company has just had to pay a fine of $100 million. They have admitted no wrongdoing. And so that shows me that the law actually doesn't work. And the law needs to be updated to promote innovation, because not every company has $100 million out there. So how are we actually promoting innovation under the rule of the SEC? And that is my rant. George, you had your hand up before Naomi, so take it away.
That was a great rant.
Yeah,
Thank
guys,
you.
I think we're all angry about this. It's kind of funny. I thought I'd be the most angry, but I think I'm the least angry. But some of you guys all pointed out $100 million is such a round, random number. Like, that's the damages the consumers felt because they got over 0.02% on their money. Give me a break.
Right.
The SEC's consumer protection ideology has been called into question ever since the meme stock revolution with GameStop, when they brought the legend Roaring Kitty out to make an example of him, while a literal billionaire sat there and made sure things went the correct way because, he was paying for order flow and a trade went against him one time. Oh no, it's not like you bought the most expensive house in United States history. Like, I'm not even a Blockfi customer, but why is the SEC taking it upon themselves to say that Blockfi was in the wrong just so that they can go public? It's like, hey, here's the bribe. You have to pay $100 million so you can go public. And
it's extortion.
I don't know if you guys know this about me, but I don't think any company should go public, given access to private capital is actually pretty readily available. And the public is not really me, you, us four on here. It's really pension funds and institutional investors. But anyway, I'll cede the floor to Naomi for her last little bit because she looked angry.
I'm always angry, guys. This is why you have me on the show, because I just come on here and I get really, really angry and everyone goes, calm down, Naomi. Please calm down. It's awkward for all of us. I will just end on an angry note just to make things, in line with precedent. So the SEC is not only targeting successful companies, they're also not opening up that dialogue. You illustrated a great anecdote there, Jen, where you're talking about this absurd Kafkaesque, exchange where it's like, hey, you have permission, but you don't really have permission. Don't take this as permission, but here's your permission. And it's just like the absurdity of that situation. But that's not even a one-off. If you look at the way they've handled the library case, where library literally for years wrote to them and was like, hey, how do we do this thing legally? And the SEC kept coming back and saying, we can't tell you how to do it legally, but we'll tell you that what you're doing is illegal. And then they're like, okay, so what is illegal? And they're like, oh, we can't tell you that, but just know it is. And they're like, well, can you give us any guidelines for how to move forward? They're like, we can't give you guidelines to move forward, but just know that what you're doing right now isn't what we think you should do. And they're like, you're giving us nothing. This is how the SEC deals with all these companies. If you look at Coinbase when they had their Earn program, there are so many companies that will go to Washington, D.C. and will meet with all of these regulators and to try to, create these connections and introduce them to what they're doing. And the SEC routinely is the only agency that will not see these companies. They just will not take the time to talk with these companies. And yet the SEC's official narrative is, we're open to dialogue. Come to us. Let's talk about this. And when they do, it's just a never-ending spiral of non-committal sentences and, kicking the can down the road and basically not making any judgment. So they're a joke institution at this stage. But let's go on to our final topic, and I'm going to throw it to you, George.
Welcome to the Hash, where we get angry about the government. And today's last story is about the government again. So my story is about Representative Josh Gottheimer from New Jersey introducing a bill for government-backed stablecoin insurance. So the bill would designate certain stablecoins as qualified, making them redeemable on a one-to-one basis for USD. Sort of feels like FDIC insurance for stablecoins, where instead of protecting consumers' bank accounts, you're protecting their stablecoins. And this comes before the Senate Banking Committee is to meet for a hearing on stablecoins. And based on the article, it seems that there's an expectation for a markup of stablecoin legislation and broader crypto policy that will be coming out in the next few months. And I think this butts up pretty nicely to an article Paul Brody from Ernst & Young wrote for CoinDesk about why CBDCs, the central bank digital currencies, are going to disappoint. But somehow the article highlighted the exact opposite reason I would be disappointed in CBDCs. He said something along the lines of a US CBDC would not be very programmable and flexible. But, I think, and this is not kind of going away from the story, is that a US CBDC would be such a hilariously large failure once citizens realize that their money is not only programmable by, just the government and is perfectly surveillable by the government and completely wide open, but only for the government and perfectly censorable by the government. No, thanks. I think that the bill from a Democrat, nonetheless, is a move in the right direction in how the U.S. should approach the CBDC conversation. How perfectly fitting would it be for China to have their CBDC that is controlled completely, and the U.S. has a privately issued stablecoin that flows like private cash through, the economy. Whether I want it to be pegged to, a melting ice cube that is U.S. dollar is up for debate. And that's a separate conversation. But Naomi, I'd like to throw it to you.
I'll provide a slightly different take on this. I think this bill is ridiculous. Because why on earth should the government be in the business of insuring stablecoins? Why do we need the government involved with this? We've seen what damage it can do when the government gets involved in the business of insurance. Look at FDIC insurance, for example. It's literally a tool by which they can close down entire sectors of the economy because they deem it high risk. And so that gives them purview to force banks to shut down accounts of anyone involved in the marijuana industry. It doesn't matter if it's legal in your state. They could shut down those accounts. Shut down the accounts of sex workers, shut down the accounts of crypto companies. They did that for years and years. We don't want the government involved in insurance at all in any of this, because it just leads to them having another powerful leverage tool to coerce people and coerce decision making. So we have insurance at the moment. We have private insurance that you can take out on stablecoins if you're worried about it. I definitely disagree that the government should be involved in this, but I agree with you, George, when you're talking about CBDCs and the dangers of them as a surveillance tool, the dangers of them as an unauditable tool. If you look at the proposals being put forth there's some MIT researchers into this, what they've designed is literally a completely opaque box that the public will never be able to look into, but the Fed has complete control over where they can just, make coins disappear, shut down accounts. They see every action that takes place. And yet, if we're worried about there being no ability to audit the Fed right now, oh my gosh, would a CBDC make that worse? It would, it would be a disaster. So I agree with you there, but I'll throw it to you, Jen, for your thoughts.
For me, reading these articles about all of these bills is just really, it's interesting because they're proposing that a certain product would be qualified and then this would be regulated. But there's, again, no information on what would make it qualified. What are the requirements? And what was interesting to me when I was reading this is they proposed that the bill would be, so stablecoins would be regulated under the OCC, according to this bill. And the OCC typically regulates the banking sector, right? And so they are proposing that stablecoins may be issued by banks and non-banks. And so I just wonder what kind of tensions there are or there will be behind the scenes, because the SEC has been very clear about them thinking that stable coins fall under their purview. And so maybe you guys can just explain to me how this works in the US. Will there be tensions between the two? That's what I read when I read this.
Absolutely. What this will do is basically, what they're aiming for, and if you look at the stablecoin hearings that went on last week, what they're hoping to push through are bills that say that banks will be able to issue stablecoins and private individuals won't, but they will in theory, they just have to get permission. But as you correctly pointed out, Jen, the hoops that they'll have to jump through, there'll be capital requirement, there'll be all kinds of things that basically will say, all right, well, only a bank fits that description. So they're going to push stablecoins into the banking sector, and this is further solidified by saying this is going to be controlled by the OCC. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, as you said, controls the banking industry. So if stablecoins will fall under them, then it's clear that stablecoins will be part of the banking industry, and then we'll probably lose the ability to have private companies issue competing options out there. Just what we want, to take away competition and leave everything up to banks, because they've done such a great job over the years. But Sandali, I'll throw it to you. Any thoughts?
I think maybe
Nope.
she can't hear us.
Maybe she can't hear.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I can hear you guys most of the time. I was like, no. But no. I did have a thought because we're going to see a lot more bills on stablecoins just because. I mean, last year the presidential working group on financial markets said that if Congress doesn't take action on stablecoins, all these regulators will step in. And I read this interesting piece by our own David Z. Morris from November on why stablecoin regulation isn't urgent, and taking some time to understand what this is a better sort of a good idea. And just as an example, Europe's big regulatory package governing crypto was drafted right after Meta's stablecoin Diem, then Libra, was announced. And a lot of the focus of the draft was not just on stablecoins in general, but on a specific type of stablecoin, which is backed by a basket of assets, which was basically targeting Diem in a way. And the framework is being discussed only this year. So it seems a little bit dated right now, and with everything that's come to pass. So, I mean, I think it's important to propose these bills so we start the process and discussion, and they certainly take time. But there's this danger in rushing in with legislation, especially when it comes to something as fast evolving as crypto, I think. I don't know if you agree. I think Naomi's nodding.
Absolutely.
So,
Government's always a lagging indicator, but we do have to wrap up. That has been the hash for today, and we've loved having you guys. But stick around. We've got all about Bitcoin later on today. We've got first mover in the morning. We've got the hash every day at 12, and we've got the CoinDesk website where you can check out all of the latest breaking news in crypto. So go and feast on those fountains of knowledge that we've given to you for free, and have a wonderful rest of your day. And thanks for joining us here. And we'll see you tomorrow.
Bye.
Teresa Santos. Cool.